So first of all, welcome and thank you all for attending. My name is Peter Hornig, and I am going to be talking about Boccia for youth aged 13 to 19 years today. So I would like to first start off that it is indeed a unique age group of athletes that we're dealing with. I mean, of course, as are also the under 12s. However, within this age group of teenage years, 13 to 19, there are many changes in the children, their lives. We have, of course, physical and social perception, which changes. Yes, as well as awareness of societal as well as structural barriers become an issue of importance. I mean, just through to mobility, them having their wheelchair, them also having greater autonomy and sort of impact in this decision-making process of getting their chair, getting around, and of course also participation within sport. There's also, which I find a lot of my students and also young athletes, is a desire to demonstrate mobility independence by often traveling either alone out and about, meeting friends, as well as, of course, coming to training once we have them involved within that. Youth at this age also are starting high school education or are perhaps also at the later stages of finishing it. This, no doubt, does have an interesting impact within their Boccia engagement and also how they may see their future progression within the sport. And of course, also personal relationships change. And as coaches, we become even bigger role models, and our coaching ethics, as well as behavior, just as persons, will influence our athletes beyond the court. I also like to look at and also mention that we have an interesting model of athlete development fast forwarded. Children and young persons learn faster. This is a scientific fact, as their brains are still developing. The plasticity, as well as just the learning process, is that much quicker. And they are, of course, also curious and aren't as afraid to make mistakes while doing so. Then there's also greater awareness of both their physical profile as well as basic physical literacy, which becomes evident due to wanting to, of course, be more independent. And of course, another very interesting fact is participants will be particularly competitive at this stage. This is really important because it will help turn disinterested teenagers into competitive participants who may ultimately use this motivation to decide on pursuing further Boccia training outside of school. So actually taking an interest within extracurricular sport activities. Now, as I previously mentioned, there is that basic awareness of physical literacy, and I would like to go by the International Physical Literacy Association, their definition of it. Physical literacy is a motivation, confidence, physical competence, knowledge, as well as understanding to value and take responsibility for engagement in physical activities for life. Boccia is a really great tool to encourage this, also with regards to the athletes that Boccia at regional, national, as well as international level represent. It helps improve physical literacy within a profound way. And with regards, or rather with disregard to their ambitions, they are going to learn to be physically active for life, engaging both within more physical activities, both within and outside of sport. So this is, of course, also relating to going out and about, to meeting friends, to taking part in cultural activities on local offer. Within physical literacy, within the scientific definition of it, we have the four elements, which are affective, physical, cognitive, as well as behavioral. And I will now go over these in a bit more detail relating towards Boccia. So within the affective tenet, we're looking at basically the motivation as well as confidence for persons to be more physically active. Boccia allows youth to build their motivation as well as confidence within a safe and judgmental-free environment. As I explored in my previous webinar, a lot of youth, or children rather, may have hesitation to be physically active due to a increased self-awareness of perhaps not doing things as prescribed, or rather as society basically prescribes for them to do, especially at their age. So really, Boccia does allow them to be developing these skills within a safe community. Physical competence is, of course, the skill to develop movement skills as well as endurance. This is something which is really quite important for developing their physical proprioception, which basically is concerned with how their body parts, arms, legs, etc., move within the world. And of course, at regards to learning a task at hand, which is really relatable to learning as well as or improving their technical process, which is really important for them completing at any task, but of course also within Boccia. And then we also have of course, developing endurance. This is both developing physical endurance as also developing endurance when they play or compete, as these are indeed very taxing efforts. Then there is also, of course, as I've said, the knowledge and understanding, which is the cognitive element of physical literacy. And this is really concerned with understanding the value within Boccia and what it helps them achieve to stay active. It also allows them to look at safety, and I also think it's very important to look at both physical as well as mental. And I mean, safety for mental is quite a not correct term, but it's more mental health and well-being. So just, allowing athletes or players to develop their boundaries when they no longer want to be pushed, and also giving them the ability and the understanding that they can communicate this to us and tell us too much, too little, or, because every athlete's different. So we have to always keep this in mind. And then, of course, we also look at the rules of the game, as well as the cultural context within the sport. And I like to summarize this as giving young players the insight into that there is a much wider community. And I think that this is a really nice cultural context for them to be aware that, hey, there are other players with similar physical profiles like me, and they are achieving things. And that, of course, also does feed into their motivation to say, hey, I can do this and I will do this. Then we have the final element, which is, of course, behavioral. This is basically regarding engagement within physical activity for life. And I also like to see, and I not also like to, but it is documented that how Boccia does enable our participants to be more active within the rest of their lives, for their entire life. So within this, they will develop the skills to freely prioritize, as well as set boundaries for how much they want to play, when they want to play, and how they want to make it either difficult or how they want to just scale things back. This, as I said, is very important for any personal development throughout life, and really does, when we observe these four elements, develop a well-rounded individual within both the context of Boccia participation, but also within general health and well-being in life. Now I would like to, moving on from physical literacy, take you into development case studies. And as some of you who were in my previous webinar, I introduced Joël, who was 13 years of age. Joël, since being introduced to Boccia in school, he has now partaken within his first formal competition, which were the qualifiers for German national championships. Here he, of course, also was classified as a BC3 athlete, and basically got to experience, as you do with a first formal competition, the entire different structural change that you go from competing within the club environment to national formal competition. Despite, of course, the fact that he did not sadly qualify for the nationals, he took along many, many learning points, and he has since implemented them. The national qualifiers were in May, and now he's, of course, jumped quite ahead within his development. Within his coaching, which I think is a central tenet to any athlete, is, of course, the solidification of his individual technical process. As of course, all athletes have a different way of propelling the ball, and even in Joël's case, releasing from the ramp. He's a very competitive individual, and he demonstrates performance at the early learning to train level within the World Boccia Development Model. He has clear aims to partake in the European, World, and of course, Paralympic Championships, and we are continually in a synergetic exchange working on this, both of course with his parents who are his ramp operators, but of course most importantly with young Joël himself. Then I will go on and introduce you to another one of my players, Mohamed, who recently turned 18 years of age. I introduced Boccia to him within school physical education. He showed a very strong interest and curiosity, and demonstrated great grasp technically as well as tactically from the start. He has cerebral palsy with severe apoptosis, so Boccia gave him in many ways a really great boost within his confidence, as of course, as you can see in the image, he's very adept at grouping his balls very well together. He demonstrates two different throwing processes, and he knows when to utilize them within play. Of course, as a coach, I will question him and I will seek input when he changes things up, why he changes things up, and this really sort of develops him into the right direction. However, this is a very interesting thing, which he is one of the only athletes in my team currently focused with. He's finishing high school. So he, of course, wants to get his high school diploma. So he trains once a week with me. He trains at home. But his priority, and I think it's very important, is to focus on his education. His skills, aspirations, as well as understanding put him in the training to train stage, despite being relatively new to competitive as well as structured play. Then we move on to, I would like to say, one of my toughest athletes to date, Zakaria, 15 years of age. I introduced him to Boccia, and initially he was very hesitant, resistant, and had really no interest in playing. He demonstrated a very, from the start, very clearly that he needs to use a ramp. He expressed a dislike for it. He told me, which took me aback quite profoundly, when he said to me, the ramp reminds me, or rather is a personification within a literal form of my physical impairment. But of course, that is due to the fact that he is extremely intelligent, and he grasps the rules as well as the principle of both handling the balls as well as the ramp really easily. Whenever he plays, you see how his mind is working, and he demonstrates excellent judgment, both with line and pace, and that was evident from just the start. So now he is really quite pushing ahead. The logic as well as strategy and the reason of working so hard mentally is what engages him to further train, as well as a really strong determination to beat the best. So he will actually engage within competition, informal, with more senior athletes than him. And of course, to beat them as well as become the best player within Germany. And despite also being relatively new, he paced through beginner, fundamentals beginner, as well as learning to play, training to train, and now he's already training to compete, with his eyes set on the junior worlds next year. Then another athlete of mine, Rosi, which makes her profile so interesting is she showcases a lot of fun when she plays. She really enjoys the ability to be physically active, to demonstrate, and also to question when performance doesn't go right. Her technical process is well developed. She has worked quite hard with her ramp operator, who was her father, on developing this. And she asks all the right questions, and she's really keen on absorbing knowledge that I provide to her on improving. Her biggest achievement, in fact, was our recent club championships, where she managed to clinch the gold medal, and with really quite impressive scores. She's also currently learning alongside both Joël and Zachariah to play within the pairs format of the game. So she is now looking at communication with her fellow athletes, and also within the further strategic as well as technical play to secure the end win when she competes with them. She takes great pride and ownership in her sports performance, and she has Paralympic aspirations. So she is definitely one to look out for in the future. Then, with my final case study, there is Florian, who is 18 years of age. He is the current BC2 Vice National Champion of Germany, and he is internationally classified as a BC2 athlete, as he took part in the European Youth Paralympic Games in Finland this year. He discovered Boccia at the age of 14 through a school teacher, where he instantly showed talent. And within that same year, he attended his first national competition, where he won bronze. And then the following nationals, 2019 as well as 2021, he secured the silver medal. Currently, we are working on upgrading that silver medal to a gold medal. And we are doing this through proper solidification of his technical process, as well as a BC2 athlete, solidifying a second or even multiple throwing position techniques so that he can adapt his performance and his play to the conditions presented locally. He is also preparing for the World Boccia Junior Youth World Championships of 2023, and his training is within an interesting split of both training to train as well as training to compete. And one thing I'd like to say about these development case studies is that they all, as I've previously mentioned, demonstrate extremely quick athlete development. And I think that that is one of the most exciting things when working with youth athletes, especially teenagers, as they will develop quite solidly within a short amount of time. Now, as I already also mentioned, within the athletes, they have, of course, set themselves within or reached milestones within the World Boccia Development Pathway. Within, of course, my previous webinar, I introduced the World Boccia Development Model as a guide within the milestones. I explored, of course, the beginners / fundamentals as well as the learning to play stage. And I also like to say, while teenagers need to explore these stages, they will most likely breeze through them and then move on to the intermediate stage relatively quickly. However, I do find that the learning to play stage will be indeed a deciding factor for teenagers, where they will most likely choose whether or not to participate and engage within the sport fully. This, of course, also can happen in the intermediate stage too. However, really it is that initial fun and enjoyment, or perhaps even for some athletes who like the challenge, the frustration, to really commit themselves to it. So here we have the model just as a diagram again, so that we can see what it's about. So we, of course, have the active start, and then the beginner fundamental stage, which is also coupled with the recreational stage, forms the broad pool where we start off. And then, of course, you have the developmental milestone, which is within learning to play, intermediate, where they then go on to train, advance, which is training to compete, and of course also the elite stage, which is training to win. However, today I'm only going to be talking about intermediate as well as advanced. So yeah, within the intermediate stage, we have the athletes engaged within regular training. For some, it may be entirely within the club. Some it may be in school, some it may be a matter of both. I have here in Germany, or in Berlin rather, established many development hubs, and a lot of them are equipped with the resources and trained staff to basically develop them within the school setting. But of course, those who enjoy it will want to come within a club as well. They also have their own equipment, from, of course, balls, as well as a pointer to a ramp. This equipment is also tailored to their needs, and ideally it can grow with them, especially within the balls. And also, which I've seen, the ramps are able to last and should last for a relatively long amount of time until they reach that stage where they self-analyze and understand that their current equipment needs an upgrade. I mean, this is for anything. It can be from the pointer through, of course, to the balls and to the ramps. Because, of course, as strength and physical profile does adjust, change, there will be need to, of course, also to review the equipment. It's also really important to have an understanding of both of Boccia and its structures, not only nationally, but also international, and to really be aware of what opportunities are available to them when they should commit to going down the really competitive pathway. For many athletes, it is also a really big motivational factor to say, hey, you can partake in the Youth World Championships, and they really have that fire in their eyes, in their stomach, and they'll charge ahead and develop themselves. They also understand the classification process. Ideally, they've already been classified, and they will also be aware of international classification and what that entails. This, of course, is also quite important to within how they play, and also how their competitors may be, so that they have starting a relative outside perspective of what awaits them when they play against others in their class. They also, of course, should understand what's meant by the technical process, and they should be working on solidifying this and developing this, and also, where need, be able to adjust this and repurpose it, and then test if this works for them in their current setup. They also should be able to, of course, confidently communicate this to their sport assistant, ramp operator, coach, as well as any other staff. This may even be, within their physical therapist. They want to say, I need to be able to do this, so I want my therapy to focus on this, or the occupational therapist. And they also, within the same tenet, will be looking to question their performance and seek input from externals, such as coaches, ramp operators, etc., on how to improve it. They are also enjoying competitive as well as strategic play, and they can demonstrate ways to solving and overcoming gameplay problems whilst in training matches, or when they're training for a skill. Why isn't this going that way or the other way? And they, of course, are also understanding of the rules as well as the flow of the game. So they know that the jack passes along and is then given back to them in an individual match, and also, of course, how they act and should behave within the pairs as well as team match. One thing that I quite like to quiz my young athletes on is identify multiple solutions and give and confidently explain this within their decision-making process when they are basically looking at a technical or a tactical obstacle, as I really want to see how they problem solve and how they can then turn around the played ball, and how they can then secure the jack, or at least make it harder for their opponent to. Of course, there is also at the training to train stage participation in regional as well as club and national competition. And if one is fortunate enough to be in a region in the world where you have international open competition, then this should also be, of course, seen as a really valuable opportunity to develop whilst still being within a relatively safe environment. Players will, of course, also seek their results from this play And as I said before, this can be club, regional, national, to just adjust and improve their training. And then, really importantly, for the integrity of the sport, understanding as well as compliance within the anti-doping electronic learning education, as well as solid understanding of the NPC, the local NPC, their therapeutic use exemption, as well as medical declaration, because we want to, of course, ensure that the athletes do not run into any penalties. When we look at athletes within the training, young athletes within the training to compete section, there should be a demonstration of a constant consistency within all shot types, especially the ones which have been so amazingly logged by World Boccia, which they can perform whilst on court. And of course, a really nice thing, and as I always say, it's a bonus, but it's also understanding when to use these shot types and their benefits as well as risks as well. So of course, that also ties into the strategic tactical planning, which is of course shot risk management as well. Then another really important factor, which is a high level demonstration of high level within control, within line, pace, as well as trajectory. So we want really the athletes to be getting their balls where they want them to be, and to understand what does impair this, what improves this, and how they may solidify certain parts within their technical process to really advance and be successful. Then there is the next point, which I think actually melts into one, which is, of course, the confidence to make decisions regarding tactics employed in gameplay. I mean, this is really important when you are competing, as well as, of course, the ability to read your opponent and how they play. And I mean, I also say, look at your opponent, study them, have the ability when you're not competing, and if they're competing, to observe them and to mentally be able to develop a file on how you can, with your set of skills, beat them, or at least make it very hard for them to win. Understanding of one's own strengths as well as weaknesses, I find is very important, because whilst we're of course teaching our athletes to be strong competitors, we also need them to be very much aware of what they may not do that well just yet, what they may want to improve on, but also that allows them to, when within playing, not make errors which would then, after they've played the match, be a frustration point for them. One of the classic examples is if an athlete can throw the jack quite far, but then doesn't manage to, or rather the first ball is at 7 meters, but then they run out of stamina and they can only, no longer secure the jack, which may just be to maximize points, so that they are able to basically not make such decisions which then hamper them within the progression of the game. And then, really importantly, which will of course be a big development milestone, which is of course collaboration within the coaching team regarding their planning, as well as what they need to do to reach. And then once they've reached that competition, to be successful when competing for their country under a World Boccia sanctioned event. Then a really, which I think is, of course, as I've previously already described, a full fluency within the process of individual, pair, and team competition, as well as understanding the pool stage, as well as knockout rounds, and how these may influence play. This is one of the things that I always say within the pool stage, try to maximize points as much as possible. And then once in the knockout round, this of course no longer is a important factor, then just winning the game is important. And for them to be aware of this and to be able to demonstrate this, because of course, once they're in the throwing box or the playing box, of course, they will focus on the play and may actually forget about this. an ability to reflect on past performances and as well as competitions and use this knowledge to understand future play. It's really important that players basically are able to, of course, just reflect. And then there are two very interesting additions to the training to compete level, which I have personally introduced, which is the definition of personal performance parameters, as well as understanding when these help, but also when they don't. I mean, as we say, gathering data is great, but then also you have combustion by over-analysis of data. And I think also with personal performance parameters, we have ways and milestones that athletes can track their development, but this shouldn't be taken as anything set in stone, because we may be having a bad day, spasticity may be particularly strong on that day, so that this isn't anything that is too important, but of course also knowing that this is still important within developing. And also, of course, understanding what influences on the day performance, which basically includes preparation as well as planning for mental, physical, and as well as nutritional well-being. Basically, this is something which is very important for them and how they go on to compete, because of course on the day performance is really, you know, what we are building up to when they are competing. Now that I've gone over the development model, I would like to talk about a topic which I find quite important, and which is something that I've, with further international coaches, have actually spoken about and have seen patterns which transcend regions and borders, which is the motivation to commit. One of the most striking observations I've made when working with athletes is two very basic scenarios. You have promising athletes who we see as coaches have all the attributes to succeed, to, you know, be internationally classified, and basically just, you know, have that just to go that step ahead. However, they may become quickly frustrated when things don't go their way. This may be due to a multitude of reasons, from example, poor quality balls, through to not the right wheelchair, or they may simply lack the willingness to invest time in developing to reach that potential that we see in them. I mean, as I've also written here, life is very interesting as a teenager, and that shadows even Boccia. I mean, I know it's difficult to to imagine because we're all very committed, but it does, and that is a potential issue that may discourage them from further pursuing the sport. And then, of course, also we have the other scenario where we have young players who brace up present, who play their first balls and enjoy success. And this is repeated. So it's not just, you know, a one-hit wonder. They really are able to demonstrate great play, and they're able to fully immerse themselves within the sport without us actually having to do much. However, they, a lot of the time, will assume that they're good, that they don't need to train as much, and then not take the commitment quite seriously. This was, if I may refer back to my case studies, actually the case of Zakaria, talented guy, played his first balls amazingly, but then he sort of said to me, why should I train? You know, I'm so good, I'm the best one in school. I'm like, well, yeah, but you have to be the best within your age group, within the country, and ultimately within the world. And that again was able to spark his interest. Now, here are some common fixes with motivation. And I always say, when an athlete is frustrated, assure them that with proper focus and more training, and perhaps even the right kit, things will improve. One fix to the equipment issue is to ask, as I previously in my last webinar stated, is to ask a more senior athlete if they may lend them their equipment so they can see what high quality Boccia equipment does do to your gameplay. Then there is the athlete who is talented, however, does not want to be that engaged yet. I often find that once they've had that taste of competitiveness, once they have basically described, I want to compete and I want to, as one of my young BC4 athletes recently put it, defend my honor, that they then take a completely different take to training, as well as committing themselves within Boccia. However, we should also be aware that it's a trickle and flow process. So we have to allow time for that. I also have athletes who are good, however, who do not want to commit yet, who have been getting closer to competitiveness, but I've just kept them going at their pace, whilst also, of course, remaining approachable and never pushy, because that will really deter them from partaking any further. Young, gifted athletes, I often remind them, or rather, try and push their buttons by saying they're only as good as the last ball, as the next ball that they're going to play. So for them, then that gives them the ability to, okay, if my next shot is good, then I'm good. And whilst that can continue to happen, when they suddenly no longer have that success, that'll really make them think, and that will make them process what didn't go right. Why did it work 10 times and now these 2 or 3 times didn't it work? So that'll engage them to want to correct that, because they, of course, want to not leave on a what they may consider not strong record. What I always like to say is we can question them as coaches and also correct them, as well as implore them to try again. This is a very individual process. Sometimes I have to question them. They will snap and instantly correct it themselves, or we will offer them, of course, corrections ourselves. I recently experienced this where I practiced the first ball with some of my ramp players, and they were not understanding why it didn't work all the time with the same balls from the same height. And then I basically showed them and introduced them and basically allowed them to discover the answer for themselves. So it really is a very unique process. Another really great fix, which I also employ, is where I ask responsible national or state team athletes to offer a mentorship. So they sort of offer advice, support, and with that constant engagement, a friendship develops. And when this friendship has developed, the athletes have someone to look forward to when they train. They also have someone to show off to, someone who is happy for their success, who also is a boccia player. And a lot of the senior athletes are very happy to be a mentor for young teenage athletes. Then there is, of course, also a relatively gamified approach. This is, of course, resource permitting, which could be anything from a log/sticker book when they complete training tasks, a certificate of recognition, just that they are recognized and that they feel that they've been noticed for the commitment and effort that they invest. Then there is, of course, also small prizes, which, can be club championships or just recognition prizes, as well as a special jersey, which, they can proudly wear to training, and they can also proudly wear outside of training. However, of course, as I've said, this is resource permitting. So I'm fully aware, even for myself, I have a very limited budget. Sometimes I cannot offer everything, but these are a couple of ideas. And one thing which I think is a general belief of good coaching is to always include young athletes in the planning of their development and consult them on both what they want to train and what they want the schedule to look like. So how much time are they willing to invest? It's much more open dialogue if you ask them, when can you train, rather than you're going to train at this time. So I always always make it a really communicative collaboration when I develop my players. and allow them to then take ownership and pride within their development and engagement. And of course, which I think is, which goes without saying, is just be honest with the athletes. Youth are especially sensitive towards this because they are growing up learning or being taught to be honest. And then we as adults, if we're not honest to them, it does sort of put them in a really weird position. They will also most likely not take that positively. So yeah, that is, those were some of the fixes that I wanted to talk about. And I also think within this stage, and I think what I also do a lot of my athletes is structured technical training. Because when we are looking at Boccia development for children under the age of 12, we're looking at play, we're looking at lots of fun. Whilst we want to keep that fun and also keep the element of play, we of course also want to introduce into technical training, which is essential on alleviating deficits, as well as constantly solidifying what can be done or what already can be done well and what they can perfect. As of course, Boccia is a precision sport, so we do strive for perfection on the courts and of course in training too. Technical training is a structured endeavor and so should follow a schema or a plan. I mean, our athletes will notice if we are unorganized and if we do not follow a plan for their development, and they will most likely also become bored if we give them 3 weeks the same resource or task to do, because whilst I certainly forget a lot of the time what I'm doing with them, which is why I write things down, they are younger and have better memory. I also believe that athletes wish to develop and win. I mean, that's, you know, why they're in it. And in order for them to do this, they need to engage within this technical training, and of course also understand that at times it may seem monotonous. I mean, I'm certainly aware, as previously myself also being an athlete, sometimes it's not very exciting practicing something over and over again. But then when you have that success moment and experience, it really sort of puts into perspective why you did that. And for a general time scheme of the session, I always try to reserve 70% of the session within technical training and the last 30 minutes within the game, which would translate to roughly 60 minutes of training, technical, and 30 minutes of play. This, of course, can be extended or reduced, developing on the athletes, on every athlete individually. Some athletes will want to technically train for the entire session. Some athletes may want to have 50-50, while some athletes just want to have 20% of training and 80% of play. As long as they get that structured technical training in, it really doesn't matter how much this is split by, because this is individual. Technical training should, of course, not be boring. I think we as coaches are really fortunate to be able to creatively teach skills which can be used in real gameplay. And I also think this is, for myself, my development and also just my pride within coaching, is that I'm able to innovate in ways. And I mean, yeah, there are many ways to technically convey skills within a fun and engaging manner. The greatest short-term reward for athletes is, of course, being able to execute the technical task repeatedly, and then they can carry this through to match play and, of course, understand why they did this and what got them there. And, of course, within the long term, the best reward is to turn this technical training into advancement within national, international competitions, and even securing medals at whatever level they're playing at. So if it's national, regional, or international. But also if it's just, you know, advancing out of the pool stage, if it is moving through to the KO rounds, that's an achievement, and that is something that should be recognized when they commit themselves to being technical proficient players. And I think I'm going to be repeating myself again, but technical training should be a collaboration and agreed process with our athletes. Of course, we have to, as coaches, exercise leadership, which also includes when athletes perhaps do not want to do something. However, it needs to be something that the athlete themselves see need, purpose, and reason to be doing. Now, to sort of get to the wrap up of my webinar, I want to talk about sport assistants as well as ramp operators and how this is coupled to performance. Young athletes need to be aware of this and how that they will need to have somebody who they can rely on to help guide, support them within their athlete journey. Of course, within teenagers, we're looking at parents, relatives, or carers who are going to be filling out this role. And understanding that, of course, regular training with their assistants will prepare them for success when they compete, and how this process is a synergy, and how this is regardless of if it is at regional, local, national, or international level. BC3 athletes should also be aware that their ramp operator is also an athlete by definition and is integral to their performance and progression. I think a lot of young BC3 players, especially when I teach them, aren't quite aware of this. And then once they see that they have a ramp operator who knows what they're doing, how their performance, of course, skyrockets. But of course, they have to also be aware that they have to train their ramp operator to work well with them. And yes, it's a really interesting process to observe. Then, of course, we should also be telling our BC1s and 4s, especially if the 4s are foot players, how their sport assistant is also an integral part of the competition participation, and how they must educate them so that they do not hinder them when they're competing. You know, not talking to the athlete, not touching them in any way which may bring in a rule infraction, which may, just hinder them to achieve their full potential. Now, my last slide is regarding sparring matches and as well as time management. Now, sparring is defined, of course, as the act of engaging in mock combat. And I think within Boccia, it's a high-level competitive emulation which serves to develop the athletes who are currently engaged. Also, of course, athletes who are watching from the sidelines will also learn lots from this. So I really do think that when we put athletes in a similar profile together, this will, of course, yield results. However, there are also, of course, ways to mix up profiles, ramp players versus throwers, kickers, etc. And that will really produce some very interesting development discussions, which in this stage, we are able to stop the time and talk to our athletes to gain input as well as output. So we're basically able to gain what they are doing, and then we are able to give them our output as coaches, what they may be able to do better. And we, of course, also able to observe play, strategy, as well as tactics that they're employing. And as I've said before, we can question them there and then, why, etc. And when we have the sparring matches where we are less focusing on coaching input and athlete feedback, we can look at time management training. And we can do this, of course, within observance within the official rule book, and basically give them that introduction to having to play their balls, communicate, go onto the court, observe what they've played, and return to the box within a secure environment of a non-official competition format. There, I am at the end, and I'm first thankful for you all your attention. And I'd like to just sort of leave the webinar with saying that working with teenagers is an interesting, exciting, as well as dynamic process. And we really make an impact as a coach which also is a direct affecting of the future of boccia. So we are really in a position to really develop, inspire, and shape the next generation of players, and also just shape our international, at one point, international athlete community representing the sport that we will love. We should, of course, also be aware that not everyone will want to progress instantly to compete. Some players may not even want to compete at all, and that's fine. We are here to have fun. Teenage athletes may say, you know, I want to focus on another sport, or I may want to focus on something else. I'm not going to really put this into focus because we're about boccia here. But basically, that is fine. And as I say to my athletes, my door is always open for them when they feel they want to return and train.